Wednesday, Wednesday, Wednesday night political talk shows that I'm starting up. Here we go. So far, what I'm seeing is a lot of states are starting to propose anti-CR critical race theory bills. And, well, for one thing, I think it's stupid that to try to ban ideas from a classroom, especially ones that are being debated within the purview of a current events class. And I'm seeing that I've read that some of these states out there have actually put them up at I've said already that you can't do it within the realm of a state school, when that's ridiculous because for one thing, students are not going to encounter critical race theory unless they are unless they're being an English major or or in law school. That's just, it's not.
I mean, it's mostly college level courses. Yeah, it's actually a sociology course, so anything that has to requires sociology courses, I imagine, might run into it. But like, it's not being taught in elementary schools.
Yep. What they're angry about are some of the claims that were in the 1619 project that already were retracted. Getting angry about already retracted claims that got fact-checked and retracted. Specifically about the causes of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
That's just...
Well, and like, if you ask most people who are against critical race theory, they literally couldn't define it for you in an accurate way, at least. Most of them are like, well, it's about hating white people, and that's not what it's about at all, actually.
Yep.
It's literally just, hey, our past was tinged with conflict between black people and white people, or white people and like people of color in general, and that has affected how our society has formed now. So we want to examine how that happened and what effects it had, so maybe we can try tackling solutions for what's happening now.
Yep. And a lot of people out there who dislike it are more opposed to a lot of the ideas out there who were that opposed to some of the opinions held by Derek Bell. It's basically people out there who are opposed to Derek Bell on the basis of they didn't necessarily like the fact that he felt that integration could be bad because it would expose black people to white people. They didn't necessarily like a story that he wrote that can be fairly described as anti-Semitic. Arguments about whether or not that impacts his politics, whether or not there's issues around certain cultural studies professors out there who that I've seen. One of them basically compared interracial dating to cultural genocide, and technically that can be a point, but I don't know. But I still believe that the Virginia v. Black ruling should be upheld. That people should be able to love freely. There are things out there where if you don't like ideas, I think you should debate them. I don't think you should ban them entirely.
I am kind of two minds about it to some degree or another, because I do think there are ideas out there that aren't worth debating, because they are that fucking bad. You know, stuff like racial supremacy.
Okay, if you're talking about...
Maybe we just don't debate it because that's stupid.
Alright, if you're talking about stuff that's already been shredded, like Holocaust denial, slavery apologetics, stuff out there that's already been debated ad nauseum.
And yet there are people on the right who will still complain when those things are deplatformed.
Yeah, and that's just dumb because I don't think that we should have Holocaust denial and the historiosity of the Holocaust basically platformed on live TV. I don't think that there's room for treating averages as constants when debating IQ differences and race, just to basically normalize segregation again. No, I think that those ideas are abhorrent, and I think that they should not. That they're ridiculous, and I also think that Tucker Carlson should have lost his job for accusing Democrats of trying to import immigrants to destroy the white race. That was insane.
And yet, it exists. I mean, if you look at some of the stuff that's actually being taught in elementary schools, especially in like the southern states, like the ahistoricality of some of our history textbooks is mind-boggling. Not saying like it's the worst ever, because there are definitely countries that are worse out there, but the propagandizing that does happen in our classrooms is still really bad, bordering on inexcusable. Like, this isn't in the classroom, but like, so Missouri. I lived in Missouri for a good chunk of my life, right? They actually have a national state park, okay? This is government funded, this is government run. It's all about, the whole point of that park is to teach about, what is it called? The Lost Cause? Conspiracy? Only they don't call it a conspiracy.
Yeah, that's
they just
insane.
teach that actually the Confederates had a noble cause, and I'm like, this is a state park. How about we don't?
That's insane, because Missouri, despite being a slave state, chose to sided with Lincoln because Lincoln wanted to save the Union and they wanted to remain in the Union.
We were taught that Missouri wasn't a slave state. We were taught that it was actually a neutral state, and that the top half of it was for the Union and the bottom half of it was the Confederacy. We weren't taught about John Brown, who's from fucking Kansas, which I've lived 30 minutes away from my whole life if I haven't lived here. Yeah, we weren't taught about John Brown at all. I literally just learned about John Brown during the pandemic.
Yeah, my school at least taught about John Brown.
Despite the fact that a bunch of Missourians went and fucking burned Lawrence. You know, just fun facts about the Confederacy.
Those things are insane.
And how it's not taught properly in schools. And conservatives are trying to make sure that it never is.
Yeah,
they're banning talking about it.
Yep.
Basically.
There's the fact that, here's the thing, and I've got the Florida bill up here. It basically mentions that when you say critical race theory, meaning the theory that racism is not merely the product of prejudice, but that racism is enabled in American society and its legal systems to uphold the supremacy of white persons. The real issue is the fact that that actually predates CRT. If you look at institutional racism in the United States, you not only have to deal with slavery, you have to deal with Jim Crow laws, and they also say that you cannot distort the history of the civil rights movement. How can you distort the history of the civil rights movement without actually teaching about what Jim Crow was? That cannot be done.
How are you supposed to talk about white supremacy and its effect on history, especially in fucking America?
When we had a war over it. We literally...
Well, it wasn't about that. It was about states' rights.
The South says that it's about states' rights.
States' rights to what?
Yeah, they talk that it's about states' rights, but the South, you don't want to know what they did, was the fact that, for one thing, they attacked northern states over the Fugitive Slave Act. President James Buchanan specifically avoided providing any economic relief during a recession because the North got hit worse, and the Confederacy claimed parts of Southern California, as well as the Arizona and New Mexico territories, which were part of the Union, which they had no claim to, and Lincoln likely would not have invaded them if the Confederacy did not claim that territory and claim that it was meant to be that those are meant to be slave states. They're part of the Confederacy. That's not that.
Basically, every piece of Confederate propaganda is lies and bullshit that doesn't take that much to debunk.
Yep.
I really, really wish we taught, like, the Civil War, like Germany teaches the Holocaust, where we teach that it was bad, and, like, unequivocally, we just like, it was bad. This is like, just factually, just teach it factually, for fuck's sake, because it's bad enough just sticking to like the historical facts. But there's so many states that like try and downplay it, and it's specifically because of the propagandizing by, I think it's the
you mean
the Sisters of the Confederacy, the Daughters of the Confederacy, I think it was.
And the
Something
Ludwig
like
von
that.
Mises
They
Institute do a lot of that.
specifically like created propaganda and politically pushed to have it taught, and politically pushed for these things so that they could basically save face. I guess probably in an effort to eventually get back to it, which hasn't worked so far, obviously. But like it's just it frustrates me so much because these things are so like obvious and apparent if you do like even a modicum of research, and people just can't be asked to. And I get personally so frustrated because I'm like, don't you want to know what the truth is? Like, don't you want to like have the accurate factual information, or do you like at least want to believe it? Say that instead of I know, or this is how it happened. Just say, I want to believe that this is what happened. And then at least I can blame you less, because at least you're being honest with yourself about deceiving yourself, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the fact that when people try to define critical race theory, they mention that they lump it in with the New Left, and with the politics of the New Left and the SDS, and they trace it back to the Frankfurt School, but they're completely forgetting the fact that, and specifically Herbert Marcuse, but they're forgetting the fact that the person out there who coined the terms paleoconservative and alt-right is, in and of himself, a student of the Frankfurt School. And Herbert Marcuse specifically, who has literally...
Like the Frankfurt School was actually this, like, super SJW fucking woke-ass motherfucking, like, thing. It was... I think it was just a school, right?
It was,
That's the whole idea
it was
of
a
it, is that
collection
schools
of...
are indoctrinating people, but they're not. They're just... That's just not what's happening.
They are basically... They were a collection of Jewish academics who had to flee Germany who were Jewish Marxist academics, who looked at the way that capitalism influences media and pop culture and mass society more generally, and had some critiques of liberal democracy, except Paul Gottfried took those main critiques of liberal democracy and basically created a version of an ideal of class solidarity based around white people and the ideal of aristocracy. The guy's insanely right wing. Worked heavily with Richard Spencer and Pat Buchanan. And
I know he regrets it now.
He regrets the Spencer connections. I'm not sure if he regrets the connections with Buchanan.
No, I meant the Spencer connection, sorry.
Yeah. I'm not sure if he regrets the Buchanan connection, though. Although that may just be him saving face. Like, I've seen the Texas bill around critical race theory, and it says this... Okay, so,
I was actually significantly more appalled at the Florida one that,
yeah, because it
we
says...
looked at.
Yeah, they're basically saying that teachers cannot indoctrinate students towards a specific view, but there are issues out there...
That view is historically accurate, you know?
Yeah, there are going to be issues out there in which teachers will always be biased. If you take a figure like Chang Xiancheng, who is fairly described as one of history's greatest monsters, he led a peasant revolt in China, wound up massacring everybody he could within his territory, and then told his army to war against itself. And he wrote the 7 kill Stele, which I know I DM'd to you. What does it actually say?
Something to the effect of, Heaven does everything for mankind, but
Yeah.
mankind can do nothing for heaven, and then kill like 800 billion times.
Yeah, kill 7 times in a row. That's why it's called 7 Kill Stell. Yeah, that guy is a. You cannot teach a history class. You cannot teach world history and not be like, yeah, that guy was blatantly a fucking terrorist. He was bad. He was an awful, despicable human being.
Like, okay, so
No.
from the Florida one that you sent me, I'm literally reading. So like it says, you may not suppress or distort significant historical events such as the Holocaust, slavery, Civil War, and Reconstruction, Civil Rights Movement, yada yada yada, right? But then
Yeah.
it goes on to say, you can't. Hold on. Examples of theories that distort historical events that are inconsistent with state board-approved standards include the denial or minimization of the Holocaust. Fine, right? And the teaching of critical race theory, meaning the theory that racism is not merely the product of prejudice, but that racism is embedded in American society and its legal systems in order to uphold the supremacy of white persons. Okay, but
Then
like,
what was the
that's
Holocaust?
historically accurate.
That's literally.
You can't talk about the history of America without talking about the history of white supremacy, because white supremacy and American history go together like motherfucking peanut butter and goddamn jelly. You know? They're like this. Even today, there are still systems in place that do actively suppress minorities. For example, just a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court found that one voting rights bill unconstitutional. I think it was, I don't remember where it was. One of the fucking East Coast southern states, I think. Specifically what happened was like the people who are writing the bill researched the kinds of IDs that people of color, particularly African American people, used, and then took that information and made it into a colorblind bill that did not mention race, and was like, we're banning these forms of ID for like proof of citizenship for voting. And it didn't take that much digging to find out how they got there, but obviously, it went to the Supreme Court and was turned, or was like deemed unconstitutional or whatever. Like, they weren't allowed to do it. Here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff like that on its face appears to be colorblind. Appears to not have anything to do with race. Usually, they're a lot better at covering up that kind of stuff, though, to make it appear that way, but that, like, will, in fact, definitively affect minority groups worse than majority groups.
Yep.
That is still a racist law. Just because it doesn't look racist on its surface doesn't mean it's not. Just because it doesn't look sexist on its surface doesn't mean it's not. I could go down the whole minority list with that. People, and I used to be somebody who thought like this. Like, I used to think, well, you can't prove it, so, it can't be racist, basically, was the idea.
Yeah, what got me to change my mind?
If you actually think about it at all, and if you actually research behind it, and you see the patterns of history where people fucking lie about not knowing the effects that it's gonna have on minority groups, and then just do it anyway, like the drug war, for example.
Yeah, I was going to say...
They lied. They just lied, and they knew it was going to affect black people, and that was the point, but they couldn't say that at the time.
Yeah, that's the thing out there from the first... I was going to say what changed my mind on those things was, yeah, partially it was from seeing the founder of the DEA, the quote that he dropped about why marijuana was illegal, should be illegal, as well as the fact that I understood environmental racism and understood that things like wanting clean air and water are actually a racial justice issue. Is if you look at a map of the Bronx in New York and you see who lives south of the highway, where all the factories are, not white people. Down where I live in Chicago, back of the yards, heavily Hispanic neighborhood, also full of factories. When you say that you don't believe that, when you say that you don't believe that there's such thing as institutional racism, what you're talking, especially with regards to environmental law, you're forgetting the fact that white people are the ones out there who typically live in neighborhoods where they'll have access to clean air and water.
Which, going back to like CRT, is because of the history we have of oppressing these people actively, then not making up for it in addition to like suppressing them in more subtle ways, so we can't get called out for it anymore. And that all of that adds up to people of color just not being at the same starting level. Flatly. I know there's a lot of people who like there are a lot of people out there who are like against like programs to help specifically people of color out, like the one where they get
NAACP,
more
Color of
scholarships
Change,
for college. What is that called? What is that called?
HBCUs,
Ah.
historically black colleges and universities.
No, it's like when specifically
Affirmative
people
action?
of color get prioritized.
Oh, affirmative action.
Yes, affirmative action. There are people who are against affirmative action because they feel like it's racially unfair. And, once again, on the surface read, technically yes, question mark. But the reason that that's there is because most people of color start off, like, say we're all, like, trying to get a foot off the ground or whatever, right? It's a dumb example. And there's an assumption that you start on the ground. So getting up a foot isn't that hard. You just go get a box or whatever, right? The problem is that assumes everyone is on ground level, and white people often are. But people of color, they're like 6 feet in a hole. And so unless we offer them something to help them climb out of the fucking hole, they're just gonna be behind. Even if we gave everybody a 1 foot box to stand on, they're still gonna be like 5 feet in the fucking ground.
Yeah, and then...
And they're still gonna be 6 feet away from the goal. These programs are necessary specifically because we have never made up for what we have fucking done to them, despite promising it many, many times. And this goes like doubly and triply, quadruply for Native Americans.
Yeah, because reservations are
so they're just
horribly
not
underfunded.
able to have access to the same opportunities. They're just not.
Yeah, if you look at reservation
And that's
land...
not to say there aren't any like poor people who are also starting underneath. I am a poor person. I don't have access to a lot of opportunities, even if they're offered to me, because I don't have a car and I don't have this and I don't have that. But people of color are generally in that position more often, is my point.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you look at Native American reservations, there's lots of issues that they have with things like lack of home ownership. There's limited... they have problems with domestic violence because there's limited resources for anybody caught in an abusive relationship. They frequently wound up with reservation land was frequently reduced by the government just to give them the crappiest soil possible. You're looking at...
And I mean, even where they've held on to territory, it's not really theirs. And I think we've proven that with like all the pipelines we run through their land.
Yep.
Like, it's supposed to be their land. It's not supposed to be America anymore. You know, that's Native American land, so that belongs to the tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to be a sovereign nation, right? That's the whole point, right? But whenever we fucking feel like it, we just go, we don't care today.
And when
And
you
that's
consider that
some fucking
pipelines...
bullshit.
Well, oil pipelines are bad in general because they destroy people's water supplies. And the fact
Oil's bad in general, but
Yeah.
that's getting it.
oil is a finite resource. We're going to the energy companies want to get off it by 2050. Opposing clean energy just means putting America behind
Well,
the
they
curve.
say they want to, but
Yeah, it means putting America behind the energy curve when you wind up saying let's support fossil fuels. Like that technology is obsolete. What we should be doing is a combination of nuclear and renewables, and basically reducing carbon emissions. Because especially when you consider that individual consumer choice.
But it's making a lot of people really rich right now.
Yeah, well, renewable energy is also making a lot of people rich. The difference is the fact that the Republican Party winds up basically saying that trying to smash their industries whenever they possibly can, even when renewables are being built by the same energy companies involved in coal and oil. Like, these policies, they make absolutely zero fucking sense. And it's...
I mean, if we really thought about it, like, all the climate change denial, all the anti-environmentalism kind of stuff is literally just anti-life in general, because it's gonna kill us if we keep going like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think most of them are like in this psychological space where no matter what they know to be true, like way deep down in whatever recesses of subconscious they have that still cling to truth, they just have such a strong cognitive dissonance about it. Like, I'm never gonna have to deal with this, even if it happens. Or it's just not gonna happen because I believe it's not gonna happen. And that's fine if it's just you that you're affecting, but if you're a politician or if you're in charge of a big corporation that's contributing to all of this, like, you're just not only killing yourself and your descendants, you're fucking murdering everyone on planet Earth.
Yeah,
because you don't want to believe that you might have to put money into shifting into different resources.
Yeah, and even at what I was going to say is even with academic curriculums, even at the college level, when I took a U.S. history course, I pointed out an observation that was inaccurate in the class when they mentioned the history of the progressive movement, mentioned that Teddy Roosevelt, the curriculum stated that Teddy Roosevelt was the guy out there who showed that you could have freedom and equality and offer an alternative to Karl Marx that would offer a compromise with the unions while still preserving democratic institutions. And I'm like, that was not actually Roosevelt's idea. It came from a Venezuelan immigrant named Daniel De Leon. That...
We want to attribute it to the old white guy.
Yep. Roosevelt was the guy there who put it in practice, but it was actually created by a Venezuelan immigrant.
It's like the capitalism apologists who like to point at Henry Ford as, look, he made 40-hour work weeks and he gave his weekend, he gave his workers weekends and, all of this stuff, but like, the unions had been fighting for that for literally decades. It wasn't his fucking idea. It was the unions that had been fighting for it. He was just one of the first people to, like, implement it.
Henry Ford was also
a capitalism level.
Henry Ford was also an insane racist and wound up building a ton of tanks for the Wehrmacht. So he wrote it, and he largely offered a publication of collected anti-Semitic screeds called The International Jew.
I mean, I think we've kind of proven that we don't give a fuck where any of these big corporations actually had their roots in. I mean, look at Disney.
Yeah, Walt Disney started off not wanting to hire Jews at all. And he started off as a believer in segregation. His views eventually changed after World War II. But 1930s Walt Disney... not the nicest person in the world. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there. I think I'm not necessarily a fan of the Chicago Public Library removing the discontinued Dr. Seuss books from their collection. I think that we should be honest about our cultural history, because once you start saying this text is bad and nobody should be allowed to read it because we value diversity and inclusion, the question becomes, well, what do you do about the barbarians at the gate? You have to deal with the Christian right, basically making it so that most banned books...
It wasn't banned, though. The company just stopped printing them.
The Chicago Public Library removed them from their collection.
Oh. I mean...
That, I think, if you look at the most banned books, they're usually books aimed at children, which normalize LGBT parenting and transgender youth.
I think there's a difference between banning an LGBT book that's supposed to help LGBT youth and banning a book that's literally so fucking xenophobic that even the publishing company was like, nah, but we don't publish this anymore.
Yeah, but at the same time, I still think out there that it's a bad idea from a case law perspective to normalize state censorship. Because once you start saying that books can be removed for ideological content, you've opened up the floodgates for the people out there who come from a completely opposite view to say, we find this objectionable, We want it gone.
I just think that there's a certain line behind which it's probably okay to remove them from public libraries.
Right, but at the same time, if you start doing that,
That's
how
the
do you?
slippery slope fallacy. Like, here's the thing. There's lots of scenarios where if you want to take it to, like, you want to follow it down as if we are going to approve of it every time it comes up. Yeah, it's pretty much anything's going to end up in a bad place. I don't think banning xenophobic books is actually going to lead to us banning fucking, like, I just don't see that happening. And I would obviously fight against it if I did see it happening.
Well, the
But
argument,
that's because there is a difference in the content and what it is intended to do.
well, with the Dr. Seuss books, it was mostly outdated racial stereotypes. How do you necessarily deal with some of the authors from the early 20th century who, by and large, had views that are completely unacceptable today? What would you do about somebody who held view? What do you do with like books published by somebody out there who held views like Jack London, H.P. Lovecraft, Margaret Mitchell,
In the book,
Sax
though,
Rohmer?
like, explicitly.
Lovecraft had a number of slurs in his books. Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the
Having
Wind
a
was.
slur isn't the same thing as promoting that viewpoint, though.
He
like,
also
for
would-
instance,
he also
the,
mentioned
the
Africa-
Huckleberry Finn books have
Yeah,
slurs,
but
and they're taught in schools still.
Yeah, but
Because there's context as to why that's there. It's not saying this is racism is good. You know, foreign people are bad.
yeah, but
There's a
Lovecraft was
difference.
also he wasn't a
Lovecraft
member.
was very racist.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not defending him, but like, if his works didn't explicitly promote those racist views,
Well, there are
then
lines
I
in there
wouldn't-
where he specifically says that that specifically described black people as being, in particular black people in Africa, as being primitive. Those are things that are in
that
there.
is very dog whistly, admittedly.
Yeah,
Um,
Sax Rohmer, his Fu Manchu novels. Holy shit, Fu Manchu was the archetypical yellow peril villain. He was
Let
a
me-
Chinese
let me-
mad scientist wanting to exterminate the white race. Like, the argument becomes, at what point does it become an issue of
rephrase
cultural
slightly.
preservation?
The banned Dr. Seuss books, or at least one of them I know, was very explicitly, basically, foreigners bad, based on stereotypes.
Which book are you talking about?
I don't remember the title.
There
I'm
was-
gonna be
yeah.
100% honest. This was like weeks ago that this happened, and everything is happening every week. So
I think that when it involves children's
it was
books
like
that
the
are used,
one about people who were quote Oriental end quote. Not that I would ever like specifically use that phrase personally. Because he was very anti-Asian for a really long time.
yeah, he regretted a lot of those. He regretted a
yes.
lot of those caricatures, especially
But
racial
that
characters that he drew
was
later in life.
part of his history, and he did write books on it.
Yeah, and when
Those
you
books
deal with
probably just shouldn't be in public libraries. Whereas an H.P. Lovecraft story that has like maybe a bit of racism, especially if it's like from a villain or not cast as a good thing to be, the story isn't about that though. The story's about these, cosmic horrors from dimensions that we can't even fucking fathom or whatever. Not that I'm a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and once again, he was a racist son of a fucking bitch.
Mm-hmm.
But his books weren't about racism good.
Well, and it's the same thing with Jack London's racism was mostly found not in his fiction, but rather in columns he wrote. Margaret Mitchell's
like
a
I
whole
wouldn't
other can of
advocate-
worms.
Just like I wouldn't advocate for J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series to be removed from libraries, even though I think she's a fucking
Turf.
piece of shit turf.
Yeah, I was going to say Margaret
like,
Mitchell's a whole other can of
That
worms.
stuff isn't in her books. Her books aren't about how bad trans people are. So I'm not going to advocate that Harry Potter be cast out. Even though there is some sketchy shit in those books too, if you actually read it back. But I'm not going to advocate for them to, because that's not what the story's about. You know, that's not the point.
I
That's
think,
not the focus.
well, I still think that libraries are repositories of cultural history, and that they should basically be, that they should basically try to preserve whatever history is there simply on the basis that these texts were published, they were written, they should be there simply because scholars might want them. They should be upheld for the purpose that some people out there are going to want
libraries
them.
aren't for scholars, though. They're
You
for
say
the
that,
public.
You say that, but
There's
at the same
libraries
time,
that the scholars have specifically for themselves, I assume, like at colleges and shit. Or like the big library that's like the national whatever fucking
Library of
names are
Congress?
hard.
Library of Congress?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
you can still get this
is
stuff
also there to like record cultural stuff and shit like that. I don't think that your average public library, that's the point, you know?
Well, I think it should serve a similar point and try to collect as much stuff as they can. Because there's issues around, like what I was going to say, Margaret Mitchell is a whole other can of worms to the point where the racism isn't in her stories is not really, it's not really there as a problematic feature within them. It's the whole fucking point of the book. If you have actually looked at Gone with the Wind, the book is worse than the movie.
I haven't seen either. So.
It's been adapted numerous times. It's the most famous, like the film adaptation is the single highest grossing movie of all time. But Mitchell herself was she was a staunch neo-Confederate, like most Southerners of her time. And even a whole crap ton of Northerners in the early 20th century, because you had the redemption of the South. The narrative changed to the Lost Cause. That was mainstream. You had 1 in 7 white men was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. She depicted slaves as being happy, and that President Grant basically allowed black men to go around raping white women.
Yeah, because that definitely happened.
That was her take on the Civil War and Reconstruction, and it was basically lionizing the antebellum South. How do you deal with a novel that famous and that influential, and is arguably the American national epic? That's...
I don't like that.
Yeah. That's that blatantly racist. How do you deal with that? Like, I think...
mean, at this point, even if you took it out of every public library, there'd still be plenty of it to go around. So I don't think there's a way to effectively ban it.
Yeah, or somebody out there who may be wanting to do their own research, and might want to pick up a copy of something like Benito Mussolini's The Doctrine of Fascism, because they're a poli-sci student.
Okay, I think they're...
When you're dealing with...
word this that won't fuck me over. I think there is a difference between nonfiction and fiction. And once again, we are talking about books within the context of the public library banning them scenario. Public libraries aren't necessarily intended to all be resources for scholars who are researching. I think that there are appropriate libraries for that, especially on colleges. I don't think every public library is required to handle controversial texts, basically. I don't think they should be required to handle controversial texts.
I don't think they should be required to keep them
library.
To keep them in their collection, but my issue is the fact that if this becomes something out there where it's nearly impossible to find, because I have found my bookshelf has some very rare texts in it. I have a copy of Henry Gordon Bennett's Why Singapore Fell, which cost me over $100 fucking to get a book out there written by an Australian general. Or was he a general? I know he was an officer. I don't know his exact rank. I forgot it. But his entire account of the fall of Singapore and how he fought his way back to Australia. Naturally, the title of the book, Why Singapore Fell, spoilers, he blames the British for everything and accuses them of being cowards. But
I mean, it is the British.
yeah, he's like, they said to surrender, we wanted to fight. Yeah, there's issues around that. There's issues around, like, if you want to actually pick something up because you're interested in the fact that Amazon have also removed books that detail explicitly fascist, a number of books out there about on explicitly fascist ideologies. The real issue is, what if you want to pick up, one of the banned books was The Fourth Political Theory by Alexander Dugin. And that is effectively the best book on Vladimir Putin's worldview and foreign policy agenda ever written. It is largely the blueprint for his wars in Georgia and the Ukraine.
I think my point is, I think scholars who are like researching into it have like avenues they can use to get a hold of that kind of thing. I don't necessarily think the general public, like, by virtue of it existing, should automatically have access to it necessarily. The doctrine of fascism, generally I don't trust that in most people's hands, to be honest. And not that I'm, like, the definitive factor in what is good and right and just and whatever and, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's just that I understand why a public library might not want to carry them. I understand why Amazon might not want to fucking carry them, and I don't think we should be requiring them to.
Yeah, well, my issue is the fact that if I want to look at the subject because I want a better understanding of it, just for the sake of I want to understand history, and I'm not currently taking a class on it, but I want to know what happened in 1930s Italy to cause the rise of fascism. Even if I myself personally am not trying to overthrow the government and replace it with an authoritarian system, I still think that I should still be able to find access to that. I know that I've read a number of texts that have advocated those worldviews that I think that I largely don't walk away thinking that this person has a point. I walk away thinking that this is insane.
Yeah, but that's you. And you realize there are people who are gonna come away thinking, oh, that was a great idea. Like, that's the risk you run by making it publicly available and widely available.
Well,
and we have to like talk in particular about how fascism in specific is really, really good at worming its way into people and like basically changing them from the inside out and kind of paradigm shifting them in such a specific and insidious way that it should be treated as pretty fucking dangerous, in my opinion, at least.
Fascism is also psychologically harmful to anybody out there who would actually buy into it, because fascism requires somebody out there to believe that there is no individual identity. There are only different ethnic groups. You are part of a system. You are not an individual. You do not have any right to individual identity. That's the core of what it is.
I mean, that's not the only thing that it is, but yes, it's part of it.
That's the core part of it, is extreme forms of ultranationalism, extreme forms of group solidarity overriding any sort of individual impulse. Basically, and desire for authoritarian rule. Characteristics of fascist governments include religious discrimination, sham elections, etc. I think outright that the Trump reinstatement, the stuff, is pretty much fascist. I think that QAnon is effectively an American version of World War II era state Shinto. And I think
you're not going to see me disagreeing with you.
Yeah, it's literally
Trump hits quite a concerning number of like who is Umberto's 13 points of fascism.
Yeah, it's.
I think I got that name right.
Umberto Eco, yeah, the characteristic of fascism. Yeah, he basic. It's the whole extreme forms of nationalism, belief in the leader, belief in the state. I still think outright that I think that it would be interesting to see, just from my perspective, because at some point you're going to want to see exactly what's happening. If you're concerned about democratic backsliding in general. I am also not a huge fan of tankies, and I think that the elections of Daniel Ortega and Rodrigo Duterte aren't good either.
Right.
I don't think that's
Tanky's
particularly
bad.
good. Yeah.
Unironically.
Yeah.
Red fascism, not good.
People kind of forget that, the Contras were the Contras were drug traffickers who used rape as a weapon of war. They weren't particularly good either, but electing the Sandinistas back in, no, that's bad. And it's the same thing goes with, I see people try to be apologists for the Venezuelan government, and I'm like, no, that's a bad idea. Nicolas Maduro mismanaged his country's economy horribly, and is completely just getting police to crack down on protesters. He's not good.
I gotta be honest, I got my hands full with politics of this country. I do not super keep up with stuff that happens in the global south, basically, because, like I said, there's so much going on here. Keeping track of other countries' politics on top of America's politics sounds like it would be a significant amount of effort, and I only have so many spoons.
I keep track of that stuff
because... That's a lot.
I keep track of that stuff because it does affect U.S. policy. See, for instance...
Well, I'm aware that it does. It's just, like I said, I only have a capacity to, know and learn so much, and American politics is already really, really fucking complicated and really, really nuanced. And you have to do, a lot of research to actually, know about the stuff that happens here a lot of times. So it's if I kept up in the global South's politics on top of America's politics, I wouldn't have time to do anything else.
Yeah,
personally speaking.
And I also admit to having no life.
And I like video gaming, okay? I need the de-stressor.
Yeah. For me, it's...
Every time my blood pressure goes up, I get a migraine now. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
For me, it's called coffee in place of sleep and having no life. But, yeah, that's great. You have Death Wish. Here's the coffee mugs that
I don't actually have their coffee, just their mugs.
These are the coffee mugs that I have. Resident Evil Umbrella Corporation mug and a System Shock Welcome to My World and Suck mug. And
I have I have way too many mugs, to be honest.
I also have a Master Chief coffee mug over there in my kitchen that's shaped like his helmet. I actually have that. It's I have a lot of multiple gaming related coffee mugs. I wanted to get the one that's the brand of a manufacturer from the Mass Effect series. I think that they didn't have an Armax one, but I saw one for Rosenkov. I'd like to get that just to see who gets the reference. Just because that's a little bit more obscure than Umbrella, which everybody recognizes. I just like the whole, you worked for somebody out there who's a total normie, just being like, oh, is this a company you worked for? And I'm like, yeah, I worked for the Umbrella Corporation.
Did I tell you that I once wrote a zombie novel that the bad guys were Parasol Pharmaceuticals?
Yeah, what I was going to say,
Definitely not a reference, though. Not a reference to
Yeah, I was going to say, there's still, I think that a lot of people out there wind up being misinformed, and I think that largely our media is largely biased towards certain perspectives, and I think that a lot of people out there don't have a very deep knowledge of issues regarding...
Well, they don't.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people out there, when it comes to what happened over in Israel and Colombia, better understanding the systems, I think, gives people a better formed opinion. See, for instance, when fighting and hostility broke out, I wrote to my representative saying, please try to talk. I know that you're on the Foreign Relations Committee. Please try to get some sort... And I did mention that we should absolutely be brokering a ceasefire and prioritize ending the conflict and bringing up a new peace plan. With Colombia, I didn't actually write to my representative over that. I really should have. But I think that if we're giving both of those countries money, we should have money for their militaries. I think that we should be trying to effectively end conflicts in those regions and try to broker peace. with Colombia, they've negotiated a ceasefire with the an actual lasting peace with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, but there's also a number of Catholic socialists who are basically radical clergy who are still Marxist guerrillas in the region, and that could be bad. Yeah, that could be really, really bad. When it comes to leave the conversation, but I plan to worry about it. We get into politics. It's not ideal.
I mean, I think honestly, our society's kind of set up a little bit to do that because it makes us a little bit easier to kind of push into our respective camps when most people don't have a nuanced view of it. It's kind of like how capitalism ends up working with the like political system in order to kind of keep us dumb, effectively. Because we work so long, and we have to work so long, and we have to work so many days, and we don't really get the benefits we need, so we're tired, and we're hungry, and we're not getting what we need, and we're having to run ourselves down so much that we just don't have the time and energy to actually look into this shit, and therefore we can't really be informed about a lot of it. Not to mention that we kind of push this sort of apathy towards politics as if it doesn't affect us, but it does. Everything about politics affects everything about how we live our lives, even though a lot of people don't want to see it that way. And so it kind of, like I said, it ends up feeding into each other. Part of the reason the political system is so bad is because of how bad capitalism is right now and how bad it treats the worker right now. It kind of ends up making everything just fucking worse, basically.
Yeah, and when you look at labor conditions in virtually any other industrialized democracy, we work longer hours.
Virtually any other industrialized democracy.
Yeah, we work longer hours.
America doesn't rank high on actual democraticness, basically.
Yeah, that we work longer hours than the Japanese and still use them as a boogeyman of, you gotta work harder than these guys.
And then we're like, we're the best democracy, but actually we're like fucking 15th or some shit.
Yeah, I think that like places like Canada and Iceland.
We're the most free, actually.
Yeah, I look at the Freedom
Not by
House.
Any fucking metric.
Yeah, I look at the Freedom House, Freedom in the World reports. We are almost listed as a semi-free nation by them, and they receive congressional funding. That should scare people. Especially when
people don't know.
Yeah.
They don't fucking know any better.
And a huge part of it's the fact that the Overton window keeps shifting further and further to the right, to the point where moderate conservatives are now part of the Democratic Party and their coalition.
Right. Fucking Manchin. Manchin, by the way, is such a weird fucking guy. He is socially conservative, but he's fiscally liberal, and I don't fucking understand how you pick both sides' weak points, supposedly, and go, that's my ideology.
Well, even though, when you say he's socially conservative...
What?
Even when you say he's socially conservative...
That's what he claims.
Yeah, he still has an 80% approval rating from the NAACP. That's mostly on abortion because he's a staunch Roman Catholic. Manchin, I think it's good that he eventually capitulated on voting rights. I actually think he's right about the filibuster, because you have a 6-3 Supreme Court. If you got rid of the filibuster, they would just override everything the Democrats do. Republicans win one or both chambers of Congress in 2022. They can ram their agenda through.
Yeah, I get that. I do. But I don't think that the filibuster is something we should support on a, like, neutral basis. As in, like, in a vacuum, I don't think it's something we should have.
Well, you say that,
and wanting to keep it just because, well, the other side might get into power and then we're fucked is not, in my opinion, a great argument for keeping it.
Well, there was a lot of a lot of stuff that got filibustered.
Especially because it's actively keeping us from ramming our agenda through right now.
Yeah, but at the same time...
Not that it's a great agenda in and of itself, but, like, at least it's better than what the fucking Republicans did.
Yeah, but at the same time, look at what happened in the first 2 years of Trump's administration. where he had control of both houses of Congress and the White House.
You know what would be
And-
nice? If we could just get that.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's one of those, oh, we have control of all of both chambers of Congress and the White House right now. We can just ram through our agenda. Yeah, but then they'll reverse everything. They will undo everything in another 2 years. Filibuster means that legislation that's crafted is legislation that's meant to last.
But they're not letting us get anything through right now at all.
Actually, the third stimulus check got through. I know that,
How long ago was that?
that was a few months. Yeah,
Months.
but if the 2022 midterms are... Actually, no, you'd still need a supermajority, but at the same time, you're forgetting that George W. Bush had control of Congress. Had control of both chambers of Congress for 4 years, from 2002 up through 2006.
I mean, part of the reason the Democratic Party is suffering so bad, and I do think it is suffering, is partly because they won't actually be a left party. I don't know why the fuck they choose not to be a left party, but they refuse to do it. They're like moderate liberals, and they're clinging very tightly to that, even though progressive policies seem to be pretty fucking popular among the Democratic base. They know that they can get away with it because the conservatives are so much worse.
Yeah, but
And
then you lose all the
liberals
independence.
are terrified of that.
But then you
So they
lose all the
won't-
independence. There's the fact
Not
that...
all of them. Not all of them.
like,
And honestly, a lot of the independents that I saw in this last, like, presidential election cycle still didn't fucking vote Democrat. They still went independent.
you mean voted for, like,
They're not,
Jorgensen?
a lot. Okay, for one, there's a significant chunk of independent people who are actual leftists who just don't have a fucking party.
Well, there's also the
um,
fact that within the Democratic Party, when you deal with the left-wing faction is the Democratic Progressive Caucus, and then what's the centrist one? It used to be New Democrats.
The centrist one is just the Democrats.
Let's see.
Like, it's ridiculous that our progressive left politicians, like our leftist politicians, are like basically, hey, can we get healthcare now? Do you know what a leftist in fucking Europe would be saying? Seize property from landlords.
Yeah, that's
Burn them. Like, that's what the far left is everywhere else.
pretty much. We don't have a Melanchon here in the United States, but at the same time, Republicans are still going to say
Like,
that.
I'm not saying we should actually burn landlords, although I do think landlording is often, if not always, unethical. But that's a whole different conversation. But, like, the fact that, hey, can we have the basics we need to survive so we don't fucking die is radically left-wing here.
Yeah, people think that people have a very different. People are largely misinformed on what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders put in their platforms because they're misinformed by sources like Fox News and Newsmax and WorldNet Daily.
Mm-hmm.
And people out there have actually been arguing that Joe Biden himself is a radical socialist, and that's not even remotely true. Do I think that? Yeah, I think that if we got rid of the filibuster, then we'd get rid of. Then we'd easily be. Then Biden could easily get his Medicaid expansion through, which would be awesome. Be able to get the Police Reform Act through, which would be awesome. But in another 4 years, those pieces of legislation could easily be gone without a filibuster.
I'm not gonna lie. I personally don't like Obamacare.
Yeah, but expanding.
Real hot take there. Maybe it's probably mostly because of how my state handled it, which was basically, fuck you poor people, you're still not getting health care, because we're not expanding shit, and we're not gonna give you state health care unless you're literally a pregnant mom, or provably disabled already. But like, Obamacare didn't fucking help me at all. I know I'm not the only one who's fucking poor as shit and it didn't help. I don't think it should have passed the way it did. Or rather, I don't think it should have passed in the form that it did, because I think it should have required... I don't think states should have been able to opt out of the Medicare expansion. And I think that states should be required to fucking provide... I mean, I want like a single payer system or whatever, where it's like universal healthcare, where everybody gets healthcare for free at point of service, right? But failing that, where we make people who can afford it pay for insurance, and we don't make people who can't afford it, like, we give them state insurance.
Well, what the Biden plan is trying to do
as a state, I think as a state you should be required to provide health insurance for anyone under that level of poverty, or whatever the number is.
Well, what the Biden administration
you should be able
wants
to be like, if you're not a pregnant mom, fuck you.
Well, what the Biden administration wants to do, actually, is make it so that states cannot block those Medicaid expansions.
Cool.
Because that's his plan.
Are they going to require Kansas to give me health care because I make like $2,000 a year?
It's basically expanded for low-income people. So, if you say
okay,
less than 2,000,
I am a low-income person, though.
Yes.
I make...
Yes. In Illinois, if you make under $12,000 a year, you get health care, and it includes dental.
So the
vision,
legislation literally is forcing them to accept
health,
all people under a certain level of income.
That's the plan.
That's the plan. That's not gonna happen.
It's more of the fact that Republicans are going to just block that shit.
Yeah. Yet again, if we ended the filibuster...
Then you get healthcare for 4 years and that's it.
You know, that is better than 0 years.
Yeah, I just know that there's been some...
It is better than 0 years.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's the fact that even with the 6-3 court, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh have actually proven to be more liberal than people thought they would be. So even among Trump's, like, there's still a lot of Republicans who are very angry about that, about some of the decisions that they signed off on. And the real issue is the fact that what conservative activists want now is pseudo-law. Things that out there that the Supreme Court, no matter how many Republicans you put on it, simply can't do because it's blatantly unconstitutional, even from a textualist perspective. Mm-hmm. Even from an originalist perspective. Things the government cannot do because they are without a constitutional amendment. Mm-hmm. Because what they want is so insane. Like, have you ever actually, like, stuff like, I know that Texas abolished all, was it property taxes or income taxes? Yeah, they abolished all forms of state property tax, which is insane. It's like, that's called a national debt, because you cannot, with an income tax? Oh, Texas, does Texas have no income tax? Yes, you don't have... In 1982, they got rid of all state property taxes. And yeah, that was the thing I recently got rid of, was income tax. The question is, how do they stay solvent?
They don't. They don't care.
What they're doing is the same fucking thing that the Chinese government does. They put themselves in an economic bubble that's going to come crashing down. If you're
literally... So... Texas is dumb as fuck. I don't know how else to say it. Like for instance, you know, their energy grid shit that they've been doing. They don't really care as long as their rich capitalists make money. Like more than the rest of the country, which is already pretty bad about that. And the thing is, when you prioritize literally only endless profit, your model of business is unsustainable. But capitalist business owners lately especially don't seem to give a shit. And they'll do any unethical thing possible to make more money each quarter. Like, for instance, when the grid went down, they were charging people in Texas like $3,000 for a month or whatever, or for, you know, for like shit like that. They didn't weatherproof anything, which is ostensibly what they were supposed supposed to be they were supposed to be upgrading the fucking grid.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they privatized. But they didn't. Because they're idiots and they don't okay, this drives me nuts about capitalism specifically. So the idea, right, is that you make profit, you innovate, you build it better, you maintain, and so you can make more profit, right? Or continue to make profit. The problem is when we make systems that aren't like literally consumables, basically, when we try to privatize and profit off of stuff that people need, that people do not have a choice in getting, like electricity, like food, like water, like fucking healthcare, we don't have a choice in those things. I mean, we have like some choice, but like there are definitely some of those where we don't have an option. If you break your leg, you're going to the nearest hospital, you know, especially if you're like bleeding and shit and like severed an artery. You don't have a choice. You can't shop around while you're bleeding out, you know? And so the capitalist system of like profit over everything or the capitalist idea of, oh, well, we're just going to make it better in order to make more money doesn't really work with those kinds of products.
Well, that's capitalism American style. Style. That's capitalism American style because you have one party that's so subservient to libertarian economics, but even then, a lot of libertarians would take exception with them because Adam Smith, libertarian.
If you took a long-term view at it.
Adam Smith, libertarian philosopher, still believed that there was a need for state intervention in the economy because capitalism is not a perfect system and it's going to fuck up, and you will still need a state to intervene to do things out there that the state must do that private industry can't or won't. Even like Ayn Rand has said outright that possibly the most radical mainstream libertarian out there, she said specifically that there should still be a state just to keep people from killing each other.
Dude, ANCAPs drive me nuts, but that wasn't my point. Like, so capitalism, if you like think about it, it should theoretically like want to stop climate change, for example, because you know if everybody's dead, nobody can buy your product. So you would think that they would care a little bit more about that, but they don't, because for whatever reason, and I don't know why this is, I'm sure there is a reason, I don't know it. For some reason, they've taken on this idea of constant, forever, infinite, short-term, you know, quarter-over-quarter profits that are getting bigger and bigger, as if that's sustainable and that's able to continue, like, indefinitely, and it's just not. That's just not how anything works. You can't constantly make more profit every quarter. Eventually, you just have all the money, and you can't make anything, you know?
No, if you, at that point, what happens when you have all the profit is the fact that...
You would think that they would want to do something about that, but they don't.
Yeah,
it drives me wild.
Yeah, when you have consistent profit growth quarter after quarter after quarter, eventually it's going to go down. Your stock price is going to go down.
Right.
And that's going to be a thing. That's just the way that markets work. There's capitalism works through boom-bust cycles.
I understand wanting to make profit. I can't really blame anybody for wanting to make money in a capitalist system, right? We're all kind of forced to. But I think there's a point, or I don't know, maybe it's because I own my own business and I'm pretty content with the money I make, even though it's not a lot. You can't grow forever. In order to continue to make money, you have to give people money to spend on you. It's like, for instance, how we know when we raise the minimum wage, consumer spending goes up and the economy does better. But when we don't, it suffers because people have less money to spend even though prices continue to go up. Like, it just seems like it makes so much sense to just do these simple things to help your system continue on in a healthy manner, you know? But you don't because money? When you already have a ton of money anyway?
Here's the thing.
I don't get it.
That
it's just greed, right? That's gotta be it.
Here's the thing. A lot of people don't necessarily understand. They think that socialism is all Marxism-Leninism.
Yeah.
when that's not necessarily accurate, there's the fact that
Dude,
Sweden.
maybe it's just because I haven't met a whole lot of MLs IRL, but MLs fucking hate people who do my line of work. I do not have a good opinion of MLs, even though I do believe in socialism.
Yeah, I was going to say that the real issue is the fact that Sweden is a social democracy that technically owns more of its economy than Venezuela, which is a Marxist-Leninist state. But at the same time, if you look at exactly, like, if you actually look at what social democracy is, and you look at mixed market economists, like you look at, like, G.K. Chesterton himself said the problem with the world is not too many capitalists, but too few. John Maynard Keynes, I think that by his own admission, he said that he would be vindicated by the bourgeoisie. I don't recall the exact quote, but that's paraphrasing him. A lot of times people misunderstand what social democracy and mixed market economics actually are. And will put all the whole, oh, but Venezuela. And I'm like, that's not necessarily true. Venezuela is ridiculous. China is not the same thing. You can't look at a country like, say, France.
And every time a country kind of does it in an okay way, we intervene.
Well, I was going to say,
like our government. Like the CIA intervenes and makes it stop.
Well, I mean,
you didn't hear that from me. That's alleged. Whatever.
Well, that was true during the Cold War, but at the same time, Brazil elected.
We do it in the global South all the time.
Well, Brazil and Bolivia elected social democrats, and they were pretty popular. They were
now. I mean, we've definitely, okay, once again, allegedly, don't kill me, CIA. There's definitely been, like, fascist despots we've put into power.
Oh,
that's
true about Pinochet.
Specifically to crush socialism.
That's true about Pinochet, but the Cold War is over. Evo Morales, I don't think that did the United States government have anything to do with the recent coup attempt that failed? I'm not entirely sure, but I don't necessarily think so because he's been less anti-American after taking office. And he hasn't been as socialist as people expect. He has been more of a social democrat.
He was cloned.
Yeah, Silva when he was in Brazil was actually incredibly popular and still maintained, and same with Rousseff, still maintained positive ties with the United States. In the 1980s, people worried about what Mitterrand was going to do in France, because he got elected as part of a socialist platform, but he actually sided with the United States against the Soviet Union. There have been exceptions, and today, Greece was dominated by the Pan-Hellenic Socialist movement for decades. There have been...
I don't think we could get away with doing it to Greece like we do the global South, though.
Yeah, well, but at the same time, my point is that Brazil and Bolivia...
That's European. People actually care about it, you know?
Yeah, my point is that Brazil and Bolivia exist as exceptions, and I think that, where was he elected? I know that somebody out there who ran on a left-wing platform got elected somewhere else in Latin America. And then, of course, the fact that Ortega's back in power in Nicaragua, who's the type of socialism that I strongly dislike. Yeah, and then there was also the sexual misconduct stuff about him.
What kind of socialism is that?
He is basically a revolutionary state socialism. Was with the Sandinista dictatorship back in the 80s. And yeah, the sexual misconduct allegations, especially including against a girl who was 12.
Yikes.
Yeah, that guy's bad, but we're still not over necessarily.
I'm trying very hard not to go on an entire rant off of that.
Yeah.
Because I could rant probably for another solid hour.
Reagan spent
about all my favorite fucking groups. Not that I'm saying I was ever a fan of this Nicaragua whatever thing, but like lately it seems like all the like social groups that I'm a part of just like have sexual misconduct allegations coming out the wazoo. And I'm not saying I don't believe the victims, because I very much do in a lot of these cases. Not only because of the evidence provided, but because of, patterns of behavior of these leaders that are being accused. But, like, all of them are blowing up at the same fucking time, and I'm just sitting here like, why can't I just have money so that I can, like, run these groups? Not because I want power, but because I just want somebody in charge who's not gonna be a sexual misconduct having motherfucker asshole, you know? I want somebody who's not gonna abuse their fucking position of power, and I know I'm not going to.
Well, Ronald
Why
Reagan
do all
spent.
the people with capital seem to be dickholes?
Yeah, I was gonna say Ronald Reagan spent the last, he spent his entire administration trying to get rid of Daniel Ortega and siding with the Contras. But now he's back. I'm like, oh, that's not good for anyone. But when you're dealing with, like, a lot of people just don't really understand what a social democracy is.
Yeah.
And they don't understand that Brazil is, well, Bolsonaro has been destroying everything out there that Silva and Rousseff
part of the reason that they don't know is because we don't really teach that in school. The most we do teach it is, like, basically communism bad, 100 million killed, and that's about it. We don't actually teach, like, what socialism is, or any of the other different kinds of socialism.
Yeah.
Or, like, what the difference between socialism and communism is, or, like, what communism even actually is supposed to be.
Well, socialism
or,
is when,
like, any of that.
socialism is when the
that.
core functions of the state, or the core functions of the economy are run by the state. Communism is when the government runs fucking everything.
I don't know
That's
that
different.
that's true.
That's different. You're dealing with the difference between a centrally planned economy and a socialist system.
Not all forms of
And a socialist
Go
system
ahead,
in which, say, the government basically takes over energy because the energy industry in your country has failed, and the energy company has the big energy utilities have gone out of business, and we're trying to step in.
What I was saying before, that kind of ties into what I was saying before. Like, there are, I hesitate to call them markets because I don't think they should be markets. There are markets that I don't think should be run by capitalists and would be in better hands in the government, if assuming that, like, the government is actually run by the people and blah 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 blah. Okay, assuming we're in a perfectly functional democracy, which we aren't, admittedly, but it would still be better to have these things than not have these things, in my opinion. Things like housing, things like water, things like energy, things like medical care, things that you don't have an option out of, I think are probably better run by the government, who can make sure that everybody gets access to those things, because everybody needs access to those things, and there shouldn't be a profit motive behind things you literally need to survive, in my opinion.
Well, here's the issue: is that
but like, I guess I'm kind of arguing for, like, almost market socialism in a way, where, like, there's still markets, and, like, shit that you don't literally require to live can still be run however the fuck you want it to, and however it is in the capitalist system.
Well, that's the way it is. Over in much of Europe.
But if you need it to survive, I do think the government should be providing it.
Well, that's the way it is in most of Europe. The real issue with the United States is that ComEd's stock price is still $44 a share.
What's that?
Commonwealth Edison, the energy utility, they basically have
Okay.
they basically run as a
Fuck Edison,
monopoly.
by the way.
Yeah, Edison was not all that great of a guy. He shocked animals.
And not just that, but, like, all the shit he did to Tesla,
Yeah.
and all the shit he, like, kept from becoming a thing because he didn't make it, so fuck everyone else.
And they're still currently running as a monopoly, as something out there, as a monopoly out there that the state allows.
Oh, yay! That thing that capitalism
exist,
wasn't
yeah.
supposed to allow for.
Yeah, they're a monopoly, but the state basically controls them, controls their prices.
If there is more competition, then there can't be monopolies.
Yeah, the state has actually crushed competition because of lobbying. They basically argued that it's more efficient to have a monopoly and just have price controls set by the state than deregulate the power grid.
point though is that if it's completely deregulated and just anybody can start it, quote unquote, there are still industries that your average person is not going to be able to actually you can't just start an energy company, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of capital to do. Not everybody can do it. You can't just start a telecom company, you know, unless you have the capital to do it. There's a lot of businesses that you need a substantial amount of capital to start, and therefore isn't really viable in like the laissez-faire capitalism sort of competitive idea. It just wouldn't work because 99% of people wouldn't be able to actually do anything to create competition, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's there's issues with that, and the fact that we have all of I think it's about 5 companies who control virtually all of our media. Everything we consume.
Yeah, and there's like about as many who control all the food we eat, and there's about as many, like, so on and so forth. Like,
yeah,
Megacorps we're already kind of living in the cyberpunk dystopia. We just don't have like cool neon colored drugs and cyborg parts yet.
Pretty much, yeah. We're actually getting there with the cybernetic limbs, though.
Well, tell me when I can, you know, gift myself a cybernetic dick, and then we'll be talking.
Yeah. Well, let me know when I could get a gun for a head. Shall not.
I think head's probably going to be the last thing we figure out due to how brains work. But
I don't care. Shall not be infringed refers to replacing the head with a firearm to just reach peak Murica.
All right, is there anything else we wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, probably not. We just came here to basically point out that anti-CRT laws are dumb, and that the fact that the Arizona
They are.
the Arizona law would punish teachers they give fines of $5,000 to teachers for teaching.
Yeah.
For basically,
politicians making policies about what teachers should and shouldn't teach is a great idea.
Yep, it's generally bad. The main thing that they've done is just basically already make it so that math and reading are absolutely required, and now you have certain high schools that are better funded also offering computer science and foreign language, and virtually every university is going to require 2 years foreign language to graduate, and if your brain picks it up, manages to master a foreign language far better when you're younger. That's like really, really bad, because I also think the university system is favors students from rich areas.
I think that the schooling system in general sucks ass, but it's really hard to talk about that without tying it to like every other system in the entire fucking country, because the more you learn about all this, the more it's all connected together, and it all affects each other, and it all really needs to change really bad. But it's very hard to do that all at once.
Well, there's still gradualist approaches happening. Apparently Manchin I read that he just signed off on the infrastructure bill.
You know, Manchin can suck my cyborg dick. I don't really care.
Yeah, that's likely to wind up happening.
That's good. He still sucks.
Yeah, he's just basically holding up the police reform bill, but Tim Scott has said that if Manchin won't sign on, he will. He's like, I'll just cross the aisle and sign on with this because I want this bill passed.
I genuinely hope. It is my greatest wish in this fucking life. Okay, maybe not greatest wish, because I do want that cyborg dick. But it is one of my greatest wishes that Joe Manchin opens his fucking eyes about the reach across the aisle bullshit that he's been spouting and realize that the Republicans don't actually want to do that. And they won't actually do that no matter what, unless it specifically benefits them. And that's the only time they'll do it. And I hope that he just, like, gets that through his thick fucking dumbass fucking skull and, like, goes, okay, if they're really gonna be that unreasonable, as long as the Democrats try to appeal to them a little bit, then I will be okay with it. I think that's as far as I can hope that he'll go. And so that's where I hope he gets.
The Republican Party is basically a Trump cult. There was a spirit of bipartisanship during
Yes.
the Cold War.
Yes.
Back during the World War II and the Cold War, because it's one of those we don't want our country destroyed kind of things.
Oh yeah, back during the Red Scare where the communists were bad.
Yeah, it's one of those we don't want our country destroyed, so let's work together. Now it's one of those we're on top of the world. We can afford to do everything out there. Ah, somebody
And yet,
redeemed Hydrate.
Communism's still bad.
It's one of those we can do whatever the hell we want. And we're going to do whatever the hell we want because we're going to do everything out there that caused the Roman
Hey,
Empire.
you gotta hydrate.
I know. We're going to do everything out there that caused the Roman Empire to collapse. Derp. BRB. It's also the fact of the Republican Party right now is just a Trump cult.
Okay, this is where I say a bunch of gamer words while he walks away, right? Politics is dumb, but very important, as a wise man once said. Also, hello, Lucifer. How are you?
Back.
Oh, I guess you can.
All right. Next week's episode. Grab Dice Water.
By the way, do you know what this plushie is?
Which one?
This one, the round one in front.
I kind of recognize him.
This one.
No. The squirrel thing?
No, he's a dragon.
Ah. Don't recall what that's from. But I know which one's my favorite that I have.
This is Duke, the bad dragon.
I've got a pyramid head here. He's
Nice.
actually really
So
cuddly.
next week's topic.
Yeah, next week's topic. Trump reinstatement conspiracy theories and how much of a threat are they really to national security?
Fun.
Is he going to wind up basically trying to throw another fucking coup? And now while he's no longer president, wind up in prison.
Lucifer loves me. I would love to talk about that. I am very of two minds about cybernetics, despite wanting cybernetics. But I get why people are afraid of it. I'd love to talk about that.
The real issue with cybernetics is privacy. With cybernetics transhumanism, it becomes about privacy. And how much do you really want somebody else in your mind? Yeah, no.
I generally support the idea of transhumanism. However, I get the privacy concerns. I mean, our tech's already like super spying on us. Having it in our bodies and able to be like shut down by a corporation because maybe we made didn't missed a payment or something. That's kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
But I get it. I get both sides of it. I would really, really like cybernetic parts. I would have to it's one of those things where we got to be really careful how it gets implemented, you know?
I think we need
Anyway,
a shit
not
ton
the
of state
topic.
regulation.
We were wrapping
yeah.
up.
Yeah, next is going to be on Trump reinstatement conspiracies and just what potential there is for people to actually go batshit fucking crazy. All right, we are off for the night.